What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel, Joy Speaks, a channel that I created to provide a voice for the recovery community. And when I say recovery community, I'm referring to people who are struggling or who may have struggled with substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and mental health issues, and also our loved ones. Because as we know, it's not just the addict or the alcoholic who is affected, but also the community that surrounds them. Before I get started, do me a favor, hit like, hit share, but most importantly, hit subscribe. I want to say welcome, 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 and thank you to my new subscribers. My last video garnered some more subscriptions, and I'm so excited that people are interested in hearing more about my journey with my sobriety, my mental health, and my channel is just everything mental health and wellness related. I talk about my experience, struggling with different substances, but I also talk about the tools that I use to navigate coming back from a life of complete and utter destruction. I just celebrated a major milestone. You guys, we just made 6 years clean and sober from drugs and alcohol. And as I'm saying it, it is just unreal. It's unbelievable that someone like me who lived his entire life trying to run away from problems, trying to numb my feelings, lying to myself every weekend or every other day, saying that I was celebrating just by putting poison in my body. And, I know for me growing up, I didn't have a lot of resources. For where I come from, you weren't really encouraged to, talk about your feelings. And I think what that does is it creates just a bunch of ticking time bombs, because we all have trauma. We all have stuff that we go through. We all struggle. And so why not share the solutions to these problems so that maybe the next generation of people don't have to struggle as much as we did. But yes, 6 years, it feels unreal. It feels unreal. And I got to say that this past year of my sobriety and my recovery has been very different than previous years. And to be honest, every year is different. My first year of sobriety was just trying to keep the pipe out of my mouth, to be honest. It was just, how can I stop fiending? How can I stop obsessing? I was angry. I was bitter. I was resentful. I didn't understand how I had let my life just completely unravel. But it happened. It happened. And today I'm grateful for it, because getting sober doesn't just mean stopping, using drugs and alcohol. Getting sober also means, adding layers to your life that create a system or create an environment that you don't want to run away from. I was constantly running away from my problems. And so today my sobriety and my recovery is about building a life that I don't feel the need to escape from. And 6 years down the line, that is absolutely my truth. The last year of my sobriety has been, mostly focused on looking back within myself and working very diligently with my therapist. I have an incredible therapist, finally. And I gotta say, if you're struggling with substance abuse or any kind of mental health issues, having a therapist is essential, but it is not easy to find a therapist that you click with, that you bond with, that you feel seen and respected by. And I get it. I get it. To be frank, this is my 5th therapist. It took me 4 times of introducing myself, introducing my problems, opening up, going through that initial intake process, only to find out we weren't vibing. And I had almost completely given up on therapy, but I said, you know what, let me try this one last time. And I found an incredible therapist who I've been meeting with every single week. I have not missed an appointment in the last year. And I've been able to really start to look at some of these wounds that were established as a young child. Because for me, I didn't know how to talk about my problems, especially those really shameful, uncomfortable issues. I just didn't know how to. And so I think a lot of us we just try to keep moving and we just try to put a band-aid over it and shake it off. But in reality, if we don't tend to those wounds, they're still going to be there. They're still going to be there. And getting sober from drugs and alcohol, once you can learn the tools to stop putting the poison in your body, because that's the first step. And then after that, it's like, okay, now let's get to work. Let's heal. Let's identify the root cause of why I think it's a good idea to put poison in my body. And this last year, I've been able to really start to do some inner child work with my therapist, and it has been game changing. Truly game changing to have a safe space, a place where I can go to every week, and feel seen and feel heard. But most importantly, he gives me guidance and he gives me assignments and directions that, when I follow them, will directly improve my life. Um, it's unreal, just the simple ideas that he has. Once I put them into practice, my life just continues to get better. And I chase my recovery like I used to chase getting high. I am in love and completely obsessed with self-development, and I want to feel as healthy and as connected to myself and as shame and guilt free as possible. And so doing this intensive work with a therapist every week has really allowed for me to start to shed some of these skins that are no longer serving me today. Sobriety has given me back so much. It's given me back my family. I was so ashamed of what I was doing to myself in different phases of my active addiction, because I I was in active addiction for you know 15 years maybe. And each phase of my addiction included some sense of isolation or me trying to run away, because I never wanted my family to see how badly I was suffering. And we think we're doing our family a favor by losing contact and staying away and isolating, but in reality, all we're doing is causing them more anxiety, because they don't know what's going on. And some of my trauma came from family members, and those family members that inflicted that trauma on me, I don't engage with. I do not engage with people that don't make me feel safe. However, there are people in my family that I love and adore, and I have so much respect for, and I had to make an amends to them. I had to, in my 12-step process, I had to identify the people that I had hurt, and most importantly, try to make it right. And today I have an incredible relationship with my mom, who's my best friend. I have a great relationship with my younger sister. I get to be the big brother who's a role model for my younger sister. And thankfully my sister had never seen me in my rock bottom. um but now she gets to experience what happens when I put down the dope and pick up some hope. And it's such a gift. It's such a gift to be able to take phone calls, to be able to give advice. Like, I'm somebody that my family members come to when they need guidance, which is huge. I didn't ask for this when I got sober. This is just one of the many bonuses. you know um that being said, recovery and sobriety does not automatically fix everything. I definitely thought that once I got sober, then my life would just magically be perfect, and that is not the case. That is not the case by any means. But what is the case is, once I stopped using, my life got better. There's a huge gap of space between better and perfect. And my life kind of just goes back and forth from better to really, really great, and then times where I need some improvement, but it never goes back to the opposite end of the spectrum when I didn't want to live anymore. Because that was my reality. The last day of my using, I had already decided that I was done living this life. I had no hope, none whatsoever. Uh, and if you were to tell that version of me 6 years ago, who was ready to give up on life, that if I gave myself another chance, if I was willing to do some really uncomfortable work to heal and change, that I would have my own place, that I would be going back to school, that I would be thriving in school. I'm pursuing a degree, I'm pursuing a couple degrees that will allow me to take a lot of my pain and put it into some purpose. I'm pursuing a career where I know that my lived experience will be able to show up in a way for people that look like me to feel relatable. To People will be able to look at my story and identify directly with who I am because of what I've been through. And I was a terrible student before. Terrible student. The only classes I was really good at were drama, acting, and English. But today, that's not my story. And a lot of what I've learned as far as my sobriety goes, I'm able to take those tools and use them in my schooling, you know, which means me being honest about where I'm at, me being open minded to new ideas, and me just having a little bit of willingness. A little bit of willingness goes such a long way. And today I'm willing to do anything and everything to stay and to maintain my sobriety. Um, and I got to say that there's a reason why I'm so willing to do so much uncomfortable work, and it's because I'm very very clear of what my last day of using looked like, and it was pure desperation, pure desperation. So there are people who are new in recovery and they ask me, how are you willing to go to these meetings? How are you willing to do this work? I'm willing because I'm desperate to not go back to the person I used to be. I also have a lot of examples of people around me who decide to go back, and their story is always the same. I never hear people that go out and relapse come back and say, that relapse was incredible and I'm so glad I did it. It does not happen. It does not happen, or at least if it does, I don't hear those stories. And I'm glad that I don't hear those stories because frankly, if I did hear it, that might give me a bright idea. I'm not someone who says I'll never pick up a drink or a drug again. I'm a little superstitious in that way. What I will say is that I live my program and I live my sobriety one day at a time. That's it. Keeping it very, very, very simple, one day at a time. And the rest is just me giving my life to a power greater than myself. The rest, the heavy lifting in my recovery and in my sobriety is not necessarily done by me. I have so much evidence that my grandmother, who was my safe space, who is my heavenly angel, I have so much evidence that she can guide me from heaven. I have so much evidence that she is never looking down on me in judgment. When I think about unconditional love and unconditional support, I think of her. And so I credit and I tr- I credit my journey and sobriety to her. I dedicate my sobriety and my recovery to her. And that doesn't have to be your story. You get to figure out what your higher power looks like. But I just, and this is not a religious channel by any means, but what I wanted to do was just share with you guys some of the tools that have helped me get to 6 years clean and sober. I have not done this perfectly by any means. I have struggled. I have lost jobs. I have lost relationships. I have thought I was in love. I have had my heart broken. I've walked through some crazy financial insecurity. I've walked through some crazy physical health issues. As a matter of fact, last year, this time, I was going through some very, very, very severe infections. Um, but throughout all of that, throughout all of the discomfort, throughout all of the pain, one thing I know for sure is that if I choose to put a drug in my system on top of me going through something, all I'm doing is adding another layer of problems because putting a drug in my system is not going to solve my problem. If anything, it will distract me for a few hours or a few days at a time, and then before I know it, not only do I still have this original problem, but now I'm also dealing with the come down or the consequences of what I've put in my system. So today I have a life that even when it gets uncomfortable, I don't feel it necessary to put a drink or a drug in my system. I just don't. I get to live in a space that feels safe. And then I'm also very aware of not introducing myself to people or to spaces where I don't feel safe, because safety is huge for me. Safety is so important, in my household, in my relationships, and I need to be able to feel safe and supported by the people around me. And I lean on my support system as much as possible. I do not do this alone. And the reason why I'm sharing all this, and the reason why I've created this channel, is because if you are out there suffering, or if you know someone who is, if you have a family member who is isolating, or you're noticing those signs of something tragic happening, send them my video, send them my channel, reach out in the comments. I will be more than happy to exchange my information with you and make myself available and to share the resources that I have, because I really believe that my purpose in life is to use, what happened to me, and use my journey and use my pain just to help somebody else. So I'm not going to ramble on and on. I just wanted to share this celebratory moment with you. 6 years clean and sober, one day at a time. Welcome, welcome, welcome to my new subscribers. If you guys have questions, please leave them in the comments. Leave them in the comments if you have concerns, if you are curious. I am more than happy to engage with you all. So I hope you guys learned something from this video today. And if you didn't, send this video to someone else, because maybe they will. And I'll see you on the next one.